Let's see if this is working. Do a quick check. Alright guys, if you can hear me, why don't you say something in the chat? I want to see who's there. Hey Nye, how's it going? I hope I'm saying that right. Nye? Nye? Like Bill Nye? Hey Joe, how's it going? Can you guys hear me okay? Can you hear the keyboard? Alright. Very excited. We're gonna do some programming, so it should be an interesting stream. Thanks, Kevin. Glad to hear that it's sounding all right. Let me know, guys, if I need to adjust the volumes a little bit. I can't hear, like, I can hear what I've got going through my sound card, but I can't tell, you know, looking at the VUs, I can see if things are clipping or if things are too loud and that kind of thing. But, you know, let me know if things are too loud, too quiet, you know, that sort of thing. So, Joe, you've got a Kronos as well, been watching for a couple of years. That's cool. Yeah, the Kronos is a beast, man. There's no question about it. Hey, Igor, how's it going, bud? Get a little theme music going on. Some Dream Theater, maybe? Like, let's see here. Well, that's not really Dream Theater. That's more Jordan Rudess soloing, right? How do I learn to program and sample in the Kronos? So that's a good question. Actually, once upon a time, I started way back on the Kurzweil 2500, way back in the day. And that thing was a powerhouse then, too. Like, it's even still nowadays a very relevant, you know, synthesizer. And it can do some really cool stuff, even, you know, as a ROM player and that kind of thing. So I started back on the Kurzweil days, back in, you know, 1998, 1999, around there. And I had no idea what synthesis really was, other than, you know, you had some cool sounds and stuff. So yeah, no, it kind of started there, and I've been hearing sounds that other people had, and I didn't know where they came from, and I was like, well, how can I make that? How can I recreate that? So it was a long, arduous process of going, you know, what does a square wave sound like? So I could recognize it without, you know, thinking too much about it, or, you know, like that kind of stuff, right? And it just kind of built on from there. So I'd learn new techniques like FM, like what is, you know, that kind of synthesis, you know, where you're additing, or I say additive synthesis versus, you know, subtractive synthesis, and a lot of reading and that. It is a very long journey. So, and I really appreciate work. So, hey, Kelvy. My Kronos, I've got two. I've got the Kronos 288, and they've got the Kronos 173. And my Kronos 1, the only issue that I've had with it lately is I went to update to the latest OS 3.0.3, or 3.1.3 actually, I'm lying, 3.1.3, the most recent one anyway. It failed partway through the update, and I lost everything. Now, fortunately, I made a backup before I did anything, so, you know, it was kind of preemptively going, you know, I work in computers when I'm not doing this as my full-time job, so yeah, I kind of went, you know, before you do anything important, back it up. Always back it up. So I backed it up, and it's a good thing I did, because I lost absolutely everything. But I recovered. It was fine. Hi, John, from Chicago, Illinois. Windy City, how's it going? Remy? Hey, Remy, you're joining. Remy's a buddy of mine I've actually gigged with, so that's cool. So, oh, your name's Ian. I'm so sorry. So, I'll try and keep that. Oh, I see. Ian, but it's like backward. Okay, Ian. Cool. Do I commonly use Karma when live? You know what? I will be the first person to admit that Karma scares the bejesus right out of me. It's such a deep, powerful thing, and I have barely started to scratch the surface. So, other than running basic arpeggiations in the background, I really don't use Karma live. Not really. Hi, Kurt. So nice of you to join us. Kurt is a huge, huge force in the Kronos community. All kinds of KA Pro stuff, all kinds like Symphonic Dreams. He's really so much good stuff. So, Kurt, it's an honor to have you with us, bud. Nice to see you. Hey, Alan. Nice to see you. Cincinnati. I don't know much about Cincinnati. I haven't been there. Like to get there someday. So that's cool. So yeah, I'm glad that everybody's able to join us. So we'll start in a few minutes. Yeah. So if you guys have questions, yeah, this is a great opportunity to ask them, and I'll try and answer. I'll try and answer anyway as I'm going through the programming. But yeah, no, really, really glad to see everybody here. This is very exciting stuff. So, and let me make sure that I can see things okay. Someday I'm gonna get a better cam setup. I've just got a webcam on the end of a boom mic, and it does this, right? So let me see if I can adjust this and make sure. There we go. That looks like it should be okay. So Kelvy, you're saying sometimes your friends have problems with the Kronos 2 on the startup. Sometimes it won't load the KSC, and other times it deletes everything. Okay, that doesn't sound right to me. So sometimes not loading the KSC, I can understand that if the file path changes. So when you save a KSC, as far as I understand, and I could potentially be wrong about this, but as far as I understand with the KSC, a lot of the file paths are dependent. So when you save something at a certain location, if you change the folder structure, it can't find them anymore. It's looking for a specific location. So I know that could kind of cause issues. I have seen issues on the odd occasion where you'll have a KSC set to auto load and it doesn't load. And sometimes, you turn it off and back on and it seems to work fine. So there's some inconsistencies that I have seen every once in a while. Nothing for me lately though, to be honest, knock on wood, it's been pretty good. So, yeah, thanks, John. So this is, actually, I'm glad that you're here because this is exactly what we're going to be working on is the Millennium Performance Pack. So, pretty cool stuff. Pretty cool stuff. I'm very excited about it, actually. So, oh, the progress bar stops. So it starts loading and gets part way. I have seen that, and depending on where the progress bar stops, I've seen certain things happen where so the Kronos, unbeknownst to many people, is just a computer. It's basically a hard soft synth. So it's loading Linux, like a microkernel version of Linux. So it's like a mini Linux on an actual PC motherboard. It's the Intel Atom D525 for the Kronos 2, the 510 for the Kronos 1, but it's basically an Atom processor. So it's running Linux. And the Kronos software itself is more or less like a soft synth. So if it's stopping at a certain percentage, it depends on what could be going wrong. So 35%, the operating system, I'm just imagining what 35% would look like and what my initial go-to would be. 35% to me sounds like it could be something to do, I don't want to say with the operating system so much, that should have been booted. So it boots into the BIOS right away, and then it starts loading the operating system, the kernel, and then it starts loading, I think it verifies the security, like all of your security parameters that do things like whether, certain samples will load based off of authorizations and stuff like that. So it goes into that, and then after that it starts loading the samples. So it's really hard to say. One of the things that I would do, like if that was my keyboard and that was, doing that, what I would probably end up doing, honestly, is I would back everything up. I would take everything off the hard drive, save it to a USB stick. And I wouldn't even do a save all. I would actually just take everything on the hard drive off and get those original DVDs from Korg, wipe the whole thing out from scratch, reload it, and then put your sounds back on the hard drive. I would probably approach it that way and see if that fixes it, because sometimes who knows why, But every once in a while, computers decide to write a 1 instead of a 0 or vice versa, and things can go sideways. It's just kind of the nature of the beast. No technology is perfect as far as I'm aware. So how do I program aftertouch into sounds? So that's an interesting question. Aftertouch really is nothing more than a controller configuration. So when I think of like the joystick on the left-hand side, and I know I don't really have a keyboard, or I don't have the webcam component at the keyboard, but the joystick, for example, has joy plus Y and minus Y. You can think of aftertouch as the exact same thing. So aftertouch is nothing more than another controller function. And you can assign that controller function to the same, to like, it could be volume, like your amp EG, or you could be amplifying, or your amp stage. It could be, you could assign it to filters, you could assign it to resonance, you could assign it to a bunch of things, so when you push harder, it does a bunch of things simultaneously, right? So it's really more about what do you want it to do if you think about it as it's a continuous controller. So if you think of aftertouch kind of like a joystick or your ribbon, think of it like that, and it's nothing more than just a controller, and you can assign it to do things, or you can assign it to control things rather, which probably makes more sense. Okay, so yeah, let's go ahead and jump right on into it. One of the things that I was looking at that I wanted to do is I wanted to do some programming for my Millennium sound pack, and so I'm going to be doing that here today with you. And I'm going to be jumping into I pulled a few different sites, a couple Facebook groups, that kind of thing. And actually, you know what? I completely neglected to remember to put this on the Korg forum. I'll remember next time, because I'm sure that would have been a good place for people to check. So I'm going to be working on a song called Somebody Told Me by The Killers. And so that's going to be what I'm working on today for, you know, those specific keyboard sounds for all of the song. So, John, how much of the song sounds you provide on your site are 88 key dependent? Okay, so that's a good question. I've been trying to find a good way around this. I have an 88 key and a 73. The more I program, the more I realize 73 seems to be like the sweet spot. So I've been trying to fit as much as I can into 73 keys. It's kind of a nice balance between having weighted keys if you're used to playing a key like a piano, but still having a little bit less weight. In an ideal world for me, everything would be 88 key and there wouldn't be a problem, and everybody would just break their backs carrying 88 key keyboards, and I get my little dream of not needing to program for other ones, but I realize that's not realistic. So I'm thinking 73 is kind of my goal here. I don't use 61 key keyboards. I've tried. I can't do it. The weighted or the unweighted action is just too, I won't say too fast, but I've just grown up on, you know, pianos and stuff. So for me anyway, I like 73. I think it's a nice round middle of the road kind of thing. So what was my keyword before the Korg? It was actually the Kurzweil 2500, and then I had the Kurzweil 2600, then I had the PC3K, the Kurzweil PC3K, and then I went back to the 2600. So I haven't tried. Okay, so Kelvy, can you sidechain on the Kronos? Yeah, you absolutely can. So when you're in combi mode or even program mode, is there a way to stop or mute one of or a few keys? So the answer is yes. I don't have time to go into the full explanation because I want to jump into the program, but yes, it can be done. When only using some of certain keys. So I think I need more information. I think generally speaking you can. Most times if you're using something a sidechain like a compressor that will like pump while something else is like making a sound, then yeah, you absolutely can. And Kevin's saying that he also had that problem with the Kronos not booting up, and he took the memory out, cleaned the connections, and put them back, and that seemed to work, which actually makes sense too. All right, so let's just jump right into programming. So I'm going to give you an Audora audio, like, top secret kind of thing that I like to do. Oh, hey, Alberto. Alberto is one of a close friend, actually, that I've had since, back in, I think, 2002 or 2003. He actually helped me program way back in the day and got me into Dream Theater, and we've been working on stuff ever since, so. Ian, what's Chronos? I believe Chronos is one of Jupiter's moons? I could be wrong. Anyway. Okay, so one of my top secret tricks that I like to do when it comes to programming and recreating sounds is I try and get the original source of isolated tracks. So there used to be this program that was called Jam It way back in the day, and they're not available anymore, but they had a lot of, just drums, just bass, just guitar, and just vocals, and just keyboards. And so, I used to use those. Those aren't available anymore. And generally speaking, when it comes to downloading music, let's say, there are legal and not so legal ways of doing it. So I'm not going to tell you that, everything ultimately is just a Google search away, but what you're looking for are things called MOGG files, which are multi-track OGGs. You could do a search for multi-tracks. You could do a search for isolated or stem tracks, that kind of thing. And there are some websites that are available. Again, I'm not going to list them or link them or that kind of thing, but if you were to look for like remix packs, I think there's some websites out there that have a lot of really good music for remixing that give you all the isolated stuff. So again, Google search. I'm not gonna advertise what sites or that kind of thing, but I will say that having isolated tracks will make things way, way easier because you can actually hear what's going on. Igor, thank you for all of your support, man. It's really great to have that, so I appreciate that. So let's jump in. Okay, so somebody told me, I'm just going to play a little bit of the isolated track of the keys. Just let me know if you can hear this. If you can, great. If not, I'll see if I can adjust this, but hopefully you can. I'm just going to let this play for a second here. All right, so hopefully everybody can hear that because that's what I'm using to actually program some of these sounds. All right, let's go here. Yeah, just let me know if you can't hear that at all. But there should have been like synth stuff happening. All right. Hi there. Is it Wants? How do you pronounce your name? Tapia? Wants Tapia? Okay. Awesome. Thanks, Ed. Glad to hear that. Okay. So when it comes to the workflow in terms of how I put stuff together. So like let's say you're joining a new band and you go, okay, I need sounds, right? I need to do this song, or maybe you have a bunch of songs that you have to cover, right? My workflow is that I try and just get the sounds first. I don't worry about like how to split them on the keyboard or the performance or anything, because what will end up happening is, and I know this for myself anyway, is I'll put the patch together, I'll put together like a combi, and I'll play it for hours instead of programming like I should. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm gonna focus just on individual sounds first, and try and get those sounds sounding correctly in program mode, or if in combi mode I need to because I need multiple layers. I'm going to focus on program mode predominantly first, and then once I've gotten all the sounds for the song, then I put it together in a combi or maybe a few combis so it can be performed. Ian, I'm using the Kurzweil, it's a Kronos 173 key. This is my programming synth. And then the one that I use for performance is a Chronos 288 key. So I have a couple of them that I use. But the one that I'm programming on is the Kronos 173 key. Okay. So my thoughts right off the bat when I listen to this. Okay, so I hear distortion right away. So that's cool. But let's fast forward a little bit into the sound. Because when I'm listening to a sound, I'm thinking about changes in isolation of sounds over time. So it's not just enough to hear the sounds, but what happens to the sound over a duration or a period of time, what's actually going on. So here, okay, right there, immediately I heard a filter sweep, like a filter open it up. So you know that there's resonance of some kind. Typically, a filter sweep doesn't sound like a sweep unless there's a little bit of resonance. Otherwise, it just sounds like a filter that's opening and closing. Kind of similar to somebody talking and then covering their mouth and then like this. That's the similar kind of sound. So I'm just listening here. So it opens. Okay. Now, I also notice right away that I hear this. Like those notes, so that B flat. So I know this is 2 layers. So I'm going to focus first on the lower layer, or the bass. You know, so whatever the notes are. So I'm going to focus on that first. So first thing I notice, and this is going to be hard to hear, I think, on the live stream, but probably, actually, it might be stereo already. I'm not sure. I don't think so. But I can hear in the headphones that the stereo field is actually split. Okay, so to me, it sounds like a couple of distorted saws, like saw waves. There's a filter there with resonance. It has the ability to move. The stereo field is split, and there's multiple layers. If you hear phasing, phasing it is when you take 2 of the exact same waveform and offset the pitch slightly. And what happens is you have this neat phasing thing that happens. So let me give you an example of what that sounds like. So I'm going to take, on the Kronos, I've just got saws here, right? Okay, so I've got 2 saws, and they are in absolute polarity. So they match each other 100%. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the tune, or the tuning, of one of those saws, bring it up a little tiny bit. I'm going to take the tune of the other saw and bring it down a little tiny bit, and listen to the phasing that I'm talking about. You can kind of hear it going, I think of it visually, like I imagine it kind of going in a circle. Right, there's a definite top where things are lining up and then they're out of phase, and then they kind of go back into phase and they meet, and then they kind of go out and then back in again. And so that's what I'm hearing when I listen to this sound, actually, is exactly that. Now, the more I listen to it, or the closer I listen to it, in comparison, I think I hear actually a little bit of square wave in there also. So it could be that there's some square in there. And then the other thing I also like listening for is pitches, in terms of, are things in perfect unison? Are things an octave apart, 2 octaves apart? Maybe there's 3 octaves and it's in a series, like that kind of thing. Ian, no problem. Glad to help. Okay, so this is a great start. The other thing I recommend is save frequently, because if you don't, you will lose it. I've lost many. You'll get like really deep into programming, and then you forget, and then you go off of the program and come back to it, and it's like a init program again, and you're like, you know, those hour and a half of work that you were working nailing this one sound is gone. That sucks. So I'm just gonna rename this here. So this is killer. I'm just going to give it some sort of name so I know what I'm referencing. So I'm just going to call it Killer Bass Sweep. There we go. Thanks, Rudy. I appreciate it. I don't know that I'm a genius, but I'll take the compliment. Okay, so listening to this bass sound. Okay, so there's definite distortion, definite phasing. So I'm going to try and get that as close as I can first. So let's just try that. Now the other thing too is that I'm using the EXI, it's the AL1 engine, which is your analog 1 engine for the Kronos. You've got a limited number of oscillators. So you've got your 2 primary oscillators. You've got a sub-oscillator, which is your, 1 octave below, and it's either a triangle or a square, and you get to choose which one. And you've also got a sync oscillator, and then you've also got a noise generator. So you've got all of those 5 oscillators all at the same time. But if you want to make your sound thicker, so you want it to be more like analog sounding, one of the things that you can do is under the Common tab down at the bottom here, you can say Unison. And basically what this does is what I've just done manually with the 2 oscillators that I have. It does that automatically for you, and it asks you, well, how many voices do you want? So in this case, I tend to go 3. When you have even numbers, when you have 2, 4, 6, 8, what can happen is you can have phase or noise cancellation. So the waveforms kind of match each other, and it makes this weird kind of octave above pitch sound. I don't know how to describe it any better than that, but when you hear it, it's like if you had 2 pianos playing the exact same waveform at the same time. It's like a phase cancellation. It doesn't sound quite right. So I tend to go, if you were to look back at any of my patches that I've made, I tend to go 3, 5, 7, like some sort of odd number. I'm gonna detune it a little bit more. So the sense is just like, if you were to break a semitone into 100 pieces, a cent is how many of those 100 pieces do you have? In this case, I'm using 7. I mean, that's arbitrary. I'm probably going to go back and adjust this later. And then finally, my stereo spread. So when I'm listening to the stereo panning of the sound, initially when I listen, everything's dead center. I mean, you might have a little bit, just off to the sides, but generally speaking, things are dead center. So listening to the actual sound, I can hear that everything's spread right out. And then, so you can vary it however much you want. I tend to go pretty hard with the panning because I'm thinking from a live keyboard perspective. A lot of keyboardists will go mono, and that's fine. I tend to go stereo, and mostly because of the stereo space. If you have a good mixer, you can kind of separate yourself as a keyboardist. You put lead parts right in dead center for panning, but you can have big pads and stuff kind of sit on the outside edges of your stereo field and kind of, it's going to sound funny, but it kind of hugs the other instruments that are dead center in the channels, and it really fills out that sound. So John's asking, do I sample the sounds of a Moog track and then adjust the beginning and ending of the sound too instead of recreating it? So actually, no. I try and avoid using samples as much as humanly possible, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One of them is when you have anything that's tempo or BPM synced, that means that your drummer, if you're playing with a drummer, has to have a click track, because if they play a little bit fast or a little bit slow, or if the sample's a little bit too long, it's going to cause problems. And the first instance that I can think of this is I was playing with a band live, and we were playing Another Brick in the Wall by Pink Floyd, and I had the kids sample, We Don't Need No Education, and I assigned it to a bunch of keys because we didn't have enough people in the band to make it this big sound of this the choir of kids, right? So I put those isolated kids tracks as single phrases. So we don't need no education, that was one sample. We don't need no thought control, that was a second sample, and so on. Now the problem is that if our drummer was a little bit fast, or maybe our guitarist started that like that opening a little bit fast, when we got to the chorus or to the verse and we were going, we don't need no, it was too slow. The band was playing faster and it didn't line up. So for those kinds of things, I will sample sound effects, I will sample maybe loops potentially, and even then I try and recreate them as much as possible, because when you recreate them, you get complete control over the sound. Maybe there's a phrase or an articulation you don't like and you want to change it. Maybe you tried the sample live and it doesn't sound right when you play live over big speakers versus your cans or your monitors. It doesn't sound quite the same. Live can change a lot of stuff, and so for that kind of situation, I'm going to try and program it myself, so later on when I have another show, I can go, that didn't work, here's how I fix it. And that's where a lot of that programming or that live experience comes in too, right? It ultimately, at the end of the day, try it. If it works, awesome. I know lots of keyboardists who are way better than I am that use samples all the time. So that's sort of my thought process when I approach it. Yeah. So when it comes to the sound, okay, so let's take a listen. Okay, so I'm gonna spread that out quite a lot. Okay, so that actually sounds pretty good. There's more finesse, there's more stuff that needs to happen to it. For example, the attack. So I'm thinking not just the sonic properties of the sound, but how does it start and how does it end, right? So you have that ADSR, so your attack, decay, sustain, and release. I think about what is the sound doing over a period of time. So not just the filter sweeps, that comes as well, but what does it actually sound like when I first try the attack? And this particular sound doesn't snap in. It is very, very fast, but it's not a complete snap. There's a little bit of a give there when it first starts. So I'm going to adjust the ADSR under my AmpEG. And so the AmpEG is just, okay, so the way I think about the Kronos and how things are laid out, when I'm programming, you've got your EXI 1 and 2, and those are your oscillator generators or your engines. But then you've got these tabs, and these tabs kind of categorize all the different things you could adjust. So something might be your oscillator and pitch, and so you're going to, anything that has to do with adjusting pitch or pitch bend or the volumes of different oscillators, those kinds of things are going to be held under this oscillator pitch tab. But then anything filter related will be under the filter tab. Now, ADSR is your amplitude, so it's how loud is the sound over time, and so that's definitely going to be under amp driver. And then we've got our AmpEG, and EG is just envelope generator. It's a means of controlling how loud or how intense. I'd say intensity is probably a better way to describe it. How intense is something? So in this case, my ADSR is going to be the volume of the actual sound itself. So in this case, when I listen, okay, so I need the attack to be a little bit slower, just a little bit. Okay, let's compare that. That sounds a little bit better to me. It doesn't snap right in. Ian, overview of the engines. Okay, tell you what. I'll do this quickly, just so you have an idea, okay? Let me write this, because I already explained why that's not a good idea. Okay, so the Kronos has 9 engines. One is the HD1 engine, and the HD1 engine is more or less your sampling engine, right? Then you've got 8 other, I'm going to call them mathematical engines. And so what I mean by that is that they use mathematics to actually generate the sound as opposed to relying entirely on a sample. There are some caveats to that, but what I mean is, like if I go to the piano, just the Berlin Grand, right? Okay. Yes, those are samples, but there's mathematics that are happening in the background as well that control things like string resonance. So if I were to hold down a big chord very quietly, and then I press lower keys, you can hear like the harmonic frequencies that are running in the background. So that's the SGX piano engine. But then you also have, a few other engines, so I'm just going to edit this one here. So you've got the piano, you've got the AL1, which is the one that we're working in, so I'm not going to explain that too much. You've got the CX3 tone wheel organ, which is based off of the CX3 engine that was used for all of your organ sounds back on the CX. There was an actual dedicated, organ engine. So this is all of your tone wheels and that kind of stuff, as well as rotary speaker, amp simulators and stuff. And you can still use insert effects for those too. Okay, so your CX3 is your organ emulator, if you wanted to call it that. You've got your STR1, which is your pluck string, and so that does things like it simulates what a string would be, how long is the string, how much does it vibrate, where are the pickups located, like that kind of stuff. So it's really good for that. But you can do some really interesting things with the STR1 engine also that are not necessarily string related. MS-20 is the soft synth version of the MS-20 hard synth, the hardware synthesizer. Same thing is also true of the Poly 6. So they just have different sounding filters, different properties of the filters that really give them their own characteristics. And the other cool thing about the MS-20, for example, is that you've got the patch bay, or the patch panel, which is really cool. You can direct stuff wherever you want. You can take, it's literally like sitting there and saying, okay, I want my cutoff frequency to be triggered by something. No, I need my out here. Yeah, so you can actually patch things together. And I'm not going to get into that because that's another very deep synth. Mod 7. Mod 7 is basically the Yamaha DX7 on steroids, is a nice way to describe it. It can do all the stuff that the DX7 does in terms of frequency modeling. So you basically take a waveform, and then you take that waveform as a carrier, and it plugs into another waveform and modulates how that second waveform works. So you take, information out of this waveform and mathematically use it to generate another way. It's not that you're using another waveform, but you're using a second waveform to modulate what the first waveform was doing, and you can stack them. You can have like 3 or 4 stacked that plug into one. There's all kinds of stuff that you can do, and that's just the DX7 side of stuff. The Mod 7 wave shaving synth is actually a little bit more powerful than that. It can do quite a bit more. Let's see. The SGX Premium Piano, that adds all of that extra piano stuff. And then finally the EP1, which is your electric piano. So it has all the distortions and the different tines and reeds and stuff like that. So that's the quick and dirty about those different engines and kind of what they do. Okay, so let's jump back into programming. So killer bass sweep. Yeah, not a problem. Okay. So where were we? We were here. Okay. So right away, one of the things that I can tell that I'm missing already is the distortion. So there's a couple of different ways that you can add distortion. One can be an actual effect that you add. You can also use the basic amp drive, which is its own kind of built-in. You can bypass it as well, but this drive and this low boost are built into the AL1 engine. And Kurt rightly adds that you can also load the sysax data from the DX7. Absolutely true. I actually have a library of about 200,000 sounds, like DX7 sounds, that you can just load into the Kronos, and it will absolutely read the files, and it knows what to do with them to recreate those sounds, and they are very, very authentic sounding, which is very cool. So yeah, Kurt, absolutely true. Thanks for reminding me of that. So let's add a little drive here. Let's make it a little fuzzy. Now what's going to happen? A natural response of turning up drive is that the volume is going to go up. And one of the things that often happens is that you'll notice that your patches, some patches will be really quiet, some patches will be really loud, and it's really hard to get them correct compared to one another, especially when you're playing live. It can be really tricky to do that. So one of the things that I tend to do is when I'm mixing my sounds, I try and get them as close to -6 dB as possible. Now, how do you measure that? How do you quantify -6 dB? Well, one of the things that I do is I go into the Common tab, and then I go into my Master and Total Effects. And my Master Total Effects has a VU, and it'll show you how loud something is. So I can see here that it's not turning yellow or red, it's not peaking, so this is good. Now that being said, I'm going to try and keep it around there as much as I can. And so, like for example, if I were to jump into another sound, this is just the default sound, right? You can see how quiet it is in comparison to the one that I've just programmed, where I've added I've added drive, I've added a couple other oscillators on top, like that kind of thing. So you can see it actually makes quite a significant difference. Okay, so where were we? Oh yeah, I added drive, and when I added drive, I didn't save, kind of like how I warned you I would probably do. So this was at 61. There. I'm going to bring the amp level down just a little bit. Okay, so we're getting closer. Okay, it's still not quite right. There's still something in there that isn't behaving the way I want it to. So I'm going to mess around a little bit with the actual oscillators to see if I can get them to fill that sound out a little bit. It's still distorted, and I feel like there's a square in there somehow. Like there's a square wave, or it's a 50% pulse wave. It's the same. Square and 50% pulse are the same thing, but there's something in there. So this is the art part, if there's a better way to describe it. The art part is the part where you sit down and you go, And then you start twisting knobs and moving sliders, and you go, that's not it. And then you do that some more, and then you do that some more. And when you think you've got it, you save it, and then you come back to the sound later, and you go, well, I was way off. And you do it some more. And that's kind of the art part. Where you get good at this stuff is where you can identify what's wrong, and you can identify when you make a change, is it closer or further away from what you're trying to do? So, for example, when you're programming, you don't necessarily need to know what everything does. I will be the first to admit that I do not know what every single little feature does. I can't tell you mathematically what's happening in the background, but what I can tell you is if that thing that we've just changed gets you closer or further from the sound we're trying to create, right? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to play the sound a couple of times, and I just want to get a good feel for... I try and imagine how it would feel to play that sound. And that's kind of a funny thing, but that's one of the first things I actually noticed when I started playing synthesizers, is that playing feels different for different sounds. When you play strings, I feel like you can kind of dig into them and they'll swell. Certain sounds, like lead sounds, like really guitar sounds, you can thump on it and it really digs in, where other sounds don't. So I try to imagine if I were sitting in front of that synth playing it, what would it feel like to play? And does it feel the same way when I play it on here, right? So it's a subjective experience thing, but it's a neat mental tactic if you wanted to think of it that way. Okay, so I need to add filter. I think that's probably one of the first and foremost things, is my sound's too bright. So I'm just going to add a little bit of filter, not a lot. I prefer the 24 dB 4-pole, and the only difference between, or not the only, but one of the big differences between the 24-pole and the 12-pole or the 6 dB, the single filter, is actually this part right here. So this part right here is kind of describing how aggressive does it close the filter. At like, think of it as a compressor, for those of you that are comfortable or familiar with what compressors do. You know how compressors have a knee, like a hard knee or a soft knee, and that's basically saying how aggressive is it kind of cutting things off? What is the ratio? It's probably a better way to describe it. So a higher ratio basically cuts it off harder than a smaller ratio. So like a 2-to-1 ratio is a much smoother gradient to fading the sound in and out. Well, it's kind of the same thing with a single pass filter in a 4-pole. So almost how much of that brightness is kind of squeaking through. And actually, as a matter of fact, I think I'm going to stick with a single for now. That seems to bring it a little bit closer. Okay, so that's nice. I like that. It definitely needs resonance, and this is one of those experimenting kind of things. Okay, I thought I heard some distortion here. But one of the things that's nice is if you think you're hearing distortion and you're on a different page, kind of like what I was doing just now, is listening to the filter, and I thought I heard distortion. If you're not sure, you can always go back and take a look at the master volume, and you'll see that there's 2 little red lights that will show up if you've actually clipped, meaning you've hit the 0 decibel range with your sound output. And so this will let you know that if you've hit it or not. So you know if you're distorting internally, and that's even before you get out of the synth, right? That's before it even hits your DA outputs, your 1/4-inch output. So this is a great kind of quick way to tell. So going back, it wasn't distorting. It was probably my headphones, or maybe I've got my sound card cranked too high. I've got one of those Sapphire interfaces, so I might have just my headphone track turned up too high. It's possible. My wife says I'm going deaf. I don't believe her, but I can't hear her anyway. So, all right. So let's take a listen. Okay, we're definitely getting closer, but there's still some bigness that we're missing, and that kind of bigness, that width, that kind of meanness, let's say, I might need to do with some effects. You could just start adding oscillators, and that's fine. There are other things that you can do. One of the nice things with the AL1 engine is that you actually have detuned saws. So, for example, the waveform up at the very top here that says saw pulse. Yeah, John, I was kind of thinking chorus might work. I was thinking either chorus or an ensemble. But yeah, I'm kind of thinking that. So let's take a look at that in just a second. Whoops. Okay, so one of the cool things about the AL1 engine is that you've got your saw pulse. And so what this does, if I were to describe what this is doing, I wish I could draw on the Kronos right here and just kind of draw what this actually looks like. When you have your saw pulse, your wave morph is actually morphing a saw wave into a pulse wave. It's actually, so when you've got your wave morph at 0, meaning it's 100% saw. If I put this wave morph up to 100, it's 100% pulse. And if you were to take this and kind of draw it, and you were to start merging the two, the saw and the pulse together, if you were to put this wave morph at, let's say, 50, it means it's going to combine half of the waveform of a pulse wave and half of the waveform of a saw together. Hey, Vincent, you. I don't know if I pronounced that right, but welcome from Romania. Glad that you were able to join us, bud. Okay, so that's a cool thing that the AL1 synth engine can do. But what I was looking for was actually these three. So there's double saw, detuned saw 1, and detuned saw 2. And what this allows you to do is it actually generates double saws at the same time. Now, the cool thing about the detuned ones is that you get to control how much detuning there actually is. So all of this detuning is happening within a single oscillator. You can get some ridiculously fat sounding synths using this kind of technique. So if you're using a couple of detuned saws on both oscillators, right? So you have detuned saw 1 and detuned saw 2. You set the detuning so it's not crazy detuned. You still get that nice chorusy phasing effect that I was talking about. And it adds just a little bit of thickness to it. Now, that being said, I'm going to jump back to my regular saw. And I really like John's idea of let's adding the chorus insert effect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start on my insert effect. I need to go to my routing. And basically what I'm doing is I'm routing my EXS 1 and 2, so my EXIs rather. So my oscillator, or not my oscillators, but my engines. I'm going to route my engines into, instead of sending their signal directly to LR, I'm going to send them to IFX1. And so IFX1, I'm going to try a chorus. Yeah, so let's try stereo chorus. That sounds good. Okay. Yeah, you know what, John, I think I agree with you. I think I'm going to go with the chorus on this one. I tried the ensemble, and it doesn't quite do the same thing. It kind of puts it more center and then swirls around in what feels like a three-dimensional circle, right, like on a flat plane. I like the stereo chorus myself, so that seems to work a little bit better. Ian, when it comes to effects, it's more about routing. So if you think of your effects page, so this effects page right here, before we route anything, think of this entire effects page as like a rack full of effects. And you can think of this chain as the output of one and the input of another. So you can actually chain like your stereo chorus into something else. So you'll notice when we hit chain, it's instead of sending it out to your master effects and your total effects, and we'll talk about what those are in a minute, you're chaining it to the next insert effect in the chain. And so you could say, okay, I want my chorus to go into something else. So for example, let's say I wanted to add distortion to the sound. You could have the distortion happen and then chorus, or you could have chorus happen first and then distortion, and they're going to sound very different. Oh yeah, that's absolutely true too. So what Kurt was mentioning is that all of these like for example the stereo chorus, if I actually go into the chorus itself, there's a whole bunch of presets that you can use. So for example, I tend to use the initial because I try and customize it to match what the sound would sound like. But Kurt's absolutely right in that you could jump into something like super chorus. right? So basically you're taking all of these and building presets, and you can actually save your own as well. So let's say you've got one that you use on a regular basis. I might use the initial one, but I might like it really slow. So my frequency, I'm going to bring this way, 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 way down. I like that nice slow swirl. Well, if I use that on a regular basis, I can say write FX preset and give it a name, and then choose what slot it goes into. So I might say slow and deep. There we go. I'm sure there's a joke in there somewhere too. Okay, so yeah, you can absolutely use those presets for all of those. So if you're not sure and you wanted to experiment, Kurt, that's an awesome tip. Perfect. So I like the chorus, but there's still kind of a distortion missing as well. It's not quite gritty enough. Now, admittedly, we are getting really close. Like we're almost there. I kind of feel like there should be compression as well, but that could be a post effect. And what I want to try and avoid is trying to match something so specifically to the album, because that was mixed and mastered with the mixing and mastering of the final product in mind. When you're playing live, you don't necessarily want to do that. You want to have the sound be able to cut through. So there's a little bit of artistic interpretation there that happens as well. So in a lot of cases, when I try and program a lot of these sounds to match the album, I try and imagine what it would sound like before it was put through post-processing, before it hit mastering, and that kind of thing, and imagine what the original synth sounds like. So Calvi is saying, something tells me that Poly 6 has to do on this sound. So it's very possible that a Poly 6 could have been used for something like this as well. There have been times, I will fully admit, where I've spent an hour and a half programming in the L1 engine, and it sounds pretty close, but it's not quite doing what I want it to. It doesn't quite do the right thing. So I'll save it and then go to another one and see if I can get there within, like, I call it the 20-minute rule. I do this with movies as well. If I don't like the movie in the first 20 minutes, I shut it off. I don't want to waste my time. So I'm going to do the same thing here. Not in this particular instance, but I mean, you could do the same thing with the Poly 6. You could say, okay, I'm not getting there fast enough, or it's too much work, or it's not intuitive, or it doesn't feel right, or it's not acting right. You could save the sound, go to another free slot, throw it in the Poly 6, and try and do the same thing. And if you can get there faster, there's a good chance that that's the right thing to do. It's really that simple. And so that's also a very good point. Awesome. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add a little bit of distortion. I don't want a lot, and I don't want some of these crazy heavy distortions. I more want amp modeling. I want subtle, nice, smooth distortion, not crazy Derek Sherinian monster lead distortion. I want something that's going to be a gentle kind of thing. So I'm going to try the tube amp. Sorry, by the way, when I said tube amp, I meant to choose stereo tube amp, because we've got this stereo sound. If you say tube amp, that's monophonic in that part of the chain. So if you've got stereo going into this one insert effect, this insert effect is going to output it as mono. We don't want that. We want stereo. And I'm going to look at how much, what is it trying to do? How strong is it? What are the cutoffs? I want the cutoff a little bit higher than that. And so you can tell I'm just setting this to dry right now to bypass it. To me, that feels closer than we were before. So I'm going to go with this one, right program, because I tend to forget. Now I'm going to go back and put that stereo chorus on as well, because that sounded awesome. And actually, as Kurt kind of reminded me, there are presets that we can use, and I think I saved it, so I'm going to use that too. Awesome. Oh yeah, that sounds so much better. Right now, that makes a lot of difference. Okay, we're getting closer. Now, keep in mind, we've been at this for like over an hour and a half, I think, at this point, and we're still like, we've got like a second and a half of sound here. Because the next thing it does is it starts to do the filter sweep, right? So let's do this. Okay, so there's some cool stuff. I'm going to kind of fast forward just to the part where it starts the sweep. Okay, so I'm hearing a couple of things happening here. To me, it almost sounds like it could be more than a resonant sweep. It sounds like it could actually be something similar to FM or sync. I'm just kind of curious. No, it doesn't sound quite right. Now, admittedly, that does make it sound really badass. Okay, so that's cool, but let's mess with this filter, and I'm gonna assign it to my joystick to see if I can recreate that kind of sweepiness. Now that goes way up there, and the other thing that I'm noticing is that the initial sound almost doesn't change. Let me see here. Hey Wagner. Oh man, YouTube only showed the live now to me. I'm not sure I follow, but if you're here and it's live, that's good. Okay. So that sounds good in terms of the original sound, but let's see if we can get this sweep here. Yeah, that's really, really resonant. Yeah, I'm going to try something here. I'm going to experiment because what I want to do is I actually want to run this in parallel. I want to keep the original sound, but I also want that sweep to happen at the same time. Wow, that's loud. Hang on a second. Let's turn some of these oscillators down a little bit. Here, let's bring this down to, let's say 80, 80. Still loud. Let's try 55. 55. Okay, that's better. All right, so let's go to the filter, and under filter B, let's leave that as a band pass. We're going to crank the resonance up because we want that sweepiness. Whoops, I didn't mean to adjust the BPM. Okay, resonance is high. Actually, this is a... Oh, I see, Wagner, what you're saying. So it started 50 minutes ago. Okay, so for anything that you might have missed, Wagner, the good news is that I am going to post this on YouTube right after anyway. So anything that you would have missed will still be here, right? Like you're not missing it forever. It'll be available. So don't worry about that. It sucks that that you were joining late. That's all. So, okay. Actually, this is a good question for Kurt. This is one of those situations where I actually don't know the answer to this. I've noticed that when I go into parallel mode, filter B doesn't seem to do anything, right? So if I play this note and I start moving the frequency, I should be hearing resonance. But it's like filter B doesn't do anything, and I'm just wondering. Oh yeah, okay. So Psionic 111 is saying the same thing. It's like, well, how come? So I'm just wondering, Kurt, maybe you know the answer. If not, this is something we'll have to revisit later. But I don't know off the top of my head why is it that I can't seem to enable that second filter. Just a random question. But Kurt, if you know off the top of your head, that would be really awesome, because this is something that's just bugged me for a while and I haven't looked it up, right? But really what I want to do ultimately is when I listen to the sound, you can hear that the underlying part of the sound continues. It doesn't get quieter. It doesn't seem to do anything else. It stays there, and then it's like this resonant filter sweep is happening on top of the sound as opposed to manipulating the sound that we have, right? So I'm just curious. Let me see. Just in terms of experimentation, I'm going to try it on a single one and see if we can replicate it that way. So have I tried linking them? So Kelvy, I think what linking them does is it just modifies the frequency so that they match, right? So you're basically saying, okay, we're going to link them so that when one moves, the other one moves as well. So that's what the link does. And I'm trying to keep them independent from one another so I can have one sweep while the other one keeps going, right? But just for now, while I'm thinking about it, I'm going to increase the resonance just on our existing filter, and I'm going to move it around, and let's see if we can get kind of the right sound. Okay, so it sounds like it's doable, but we're definitely going to need multiple of, like, we need them all at the same time. So Wagner's saying, wouldn't be because of the type on filter B not being the same one as A. So when you say type, what do you mean? Like, oh, do you mean like they should both be, like, let's say low pass, for example, you mean? Here, let me put the resonance down to that. And let me move this one around. Oh, Kurt wants to help but can't. That's okay. Yeah, so, yeah, no, that's not quite it. You should be able to have multiple filters happening simultaneously because you've got multiple input sources. Or, well, the same input source, but you're basically saying let's split it and send it to two things at the same time. So it shouldn't matter that they're different. And that's actually okay. For the time being, I have workarounds, and I'm okay with that. And here's my workaround. In this kind of situation, if I'm too lazy to read the manual, which I absolutely am, unless I'm really, really stuck, I know this is one of the ways to do it. I'm actually just going to duplicate the oscillator. I'm going to take the oscillator or the EXI engine that I have, duplicate it. One of them's going to be the filter sweep, and then the other one's going to be the basis for the sound. Why not? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back to kind of my, there we go, back to the basics page here, common program basic. I'm going to write the program. Okay, we've got our sound. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy an EXI oscillator. So I'm going to copy from 1 to 2, and I need to use this sound. So killer bass sweep. There. There. Now I have my main sound, and I'm going to bring this frequency back up the way it was. And then this one, my second EXI synth, or in this case AL1 synth. The second one, this one's going to be a sweep synth. So the first one is the basis for the sound, the second one is the sweep. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this first one and I'm just going to turn the volume off. So I just mentally note it's at 95, I'm going to turn it off. So the only sound we're actually hearing is coming from EXI2. And now we're going to do this sweep stuff. Filter. We're going to bring this resonance way, 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 way up. And I want the resonance to be all of the sound here. Oh, that's very resonant. Okay, so that sounds all right. Ah. Now, here's something that's interesting. I don't know if everybody else hears it, but I hear two at the same time. If you listen really close, you can actually hear that there's two sets of oscillators that are sweeping independently of one another. So this could be just like one of those weird multi-track things, like multi-track tricks. So in a situation like this, where a lot of this multi-track magic happens, where you simply can't get everything in, what I'm going to try and do is approximate it as closely as I can. Okay, and I'm going to change this to a band pass instead. I really want it to not as much cut through, but really be resonant here. Okay, so that sounds good to me. So let's bring in the original sound. That was at 95, I believe. We're going to bring this filter sweep up just a little bit. There we go. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to assign that sweep to my joystick, right? Well, I mean, you could use the ribbon or something like that, but I'm going to use the joystick because why not? Okay, so the sweep under my filter. To assign something to the joystick, in this case, oh geez, I'm going to go with joystick down. I guess that probably makes the most sense because joystick up or joystick plus Y tends to be vibrato. Not always, but it can be. So I'm going to use joystick minus Y. So in this filter tab, you have all the different filter, stuff. I'm going to go to the filter mod. And the filter mod is where your modulation actually happens. So this is where you have the ability to modulate what's happening real time. So by default, you have your keyboard tracking, you have your filter envelope generator, and then you have your filter modulation. So in this case, my filter modulation, AMS simply stands for alternate modulation source. In this case, I want it to be joystick minus Y. So I'm going to change this to joystick minus Y. What this means is that when my joystick is pulled back, the intensity is how much of the filter intensity is given to the joystick. So if we were to make the intensity very small, you only hear a little bit. If you increase the intensity, what you're doing is you're telling the joystick to control more of the filter. Now when you listen to the actual track, it goes way up there. So let's increase that quite a bit here. Now, I try and get it as close as I can, so I'm going to listen to the pitch of the highest note, like of the highest resonant frequency, and see if I can match it. Okay, to me that sounds good, but here's the problem, is when it's totally closed, it's more closed than the sound that I have. So if you listen, do you hear this? It's on mine. Okay, that pitch, that resonant, is either too much or the pitch is too high. So I have a couple of ways I can approach this. I could either have it so that the resonance goes up also when I pull the joystick back, so it only gets resonant the higher it goes, or I can have it so that the intensity is higher, but the filter has to be more closed by default. And I'm going to try both and see which one's closer. Again, this is one of those situations where it's like, just listen to it and see if it works. So I'm going to go to my basic. I'm going to change this filter. I'm going to close it quite a bit. So this is kind of its default state. Hey, Umat. How's it going? Again, I'm sorry if I mispronounced, but nice to see you here. Glad you made it. Okay, I really like that deep, growly kind of woo, right? That's cool. But does the actual sound do it? I don't think so. No, so the actual sound is a little bit more open. I'm just going to fix that really quickly while I'm thinking about it. There we go. And I'm going to bring the resonance down a little bit. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have it do a combination of both. Oh, cool. Thanks, Amit. So I'm going to do a combination of both where I increase the resonance as my joystick minus Y happens, as well as it's also going to control more. And I'm spitting all over my keyboard. That's terrible. Okay, so I'm going to increase the intensity. I just want to make sure that note's right. Okay, awesome. That sounds better. It's still not right, but it is much better. So let's see if I can make it get more resonant as I move the joystick back. So Under my basic filters, okay, so my alternate modulation source for the resonance by default is the velocity, but there's no intensity to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to joystick -Y and make it a little bit more intense. So as I pull back on the joystick, it increases the resonance. Okay, that's awesome. That to me sounds very, very close, except, and there's always this except. If you listen again, and I'll play this just for a second because I'm really thirsty. I'm going to get a drink here. But when you listen to it, you'll notice that there's actually two that are resonant. So just pay attention to that for a second. Okay. Hey Nizzy, how's it going? Glad you can make it. So there's two that are being resonant in there, and this is one of those situations where if I had more time and wasn't on a live stream, I would sit down with the stupid manual. It's not stupid. I think it's actually pretty well written. I think it's stupid because I don't know it yet and I have to go read it. But I would sit down with the parameter guide. Yeah, it does kind of sound like a comb filter, right? Where it's not really taking away from the sound, it's just adding on top of. Yeah, so that's a good idea, but we don't have a comb filter in here, do we? We have a multi-filter. But I'm going to start with this, and I would actually I'd actually at this point read the manual and figure this whole parallel filter thing out so I could have multiple oscillators running at the same time. Polyphonic unison, or else use the link. Yeah, if that second filter worked, I probably would do that exact thing, yeah. Okay, so for now, there is another workaround, and this is where you get into things like in combi mode, you would actually have two sets of programs. One program that is the bass sound, and I think longer term, just not for the purposes of this live stream, but longer term, what I would do is I would get the bass or the foundation of the sound exact or as close as I possibly can, and then I would have a second layer that is just the sweeps, right? In this case, I'm trying to do it all on one. So I'm thinking I would probably do it that way longer term. But for the time being, this is okay. It's close enough for illustrative purposes to go with this. Yeah, I'm not happy with it. I'm going to be totally honest. As soon as I hear that filter open up, it's not the same. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to write this. Let's write it. I don't need it to exclusive solo. Okay. I'm gonna do it this way. I am going to have a second oscillator. Actually, here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna go to this new sound. And I'm going to copy the oscillator. Actually, it should be here. So I'm going to copy EXI from 1. So I don't need EXI 1, I need EXI 2. Copy it to 1, and this is my Kilter bass suite. So I've got... I'll have to copy over the effects as well. That's fine. But I'm going to do that again under my second oscillator. So common... Okay, copy EXI, so copy from 2 to 2. There, now I've got two of them. And I'm going to affect the filter sweep on one of them to be different by how much the filter opens and closes. So I'm going to leave the resonance, I like that, but I'm going to decrease the intensity. That way it doesn't filter as much. Actually, and when I do that, this frequency needs to come up some. It's not quite right. I'm going to change it to a low pass and see if that helps. Yeah, it's not quite right. It's not bad. It sounds like it's off by like a third, like a minor third. Okay, and I know how to fix it. So what's going wrong, the part that I can identify that's not right, is this part. Right here. It sounds kind of like it's singing or something, you know? So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to have the resonance quite low, and it only kind of picks up at the higher end. See, that sounds a whole lot better. Okay, so that sounds way better right away. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to rename this Resi Sweep. There. So I've got the sweep part, and then I also have this bass part on the other side of things as well. Well, now what I want to do is I basically want to get the effects that I have in the other one in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my insert effects. I'm actually, you know what? I'm lying. I'm going to go to the other sound, the Resi Sweep, and I'm going to go to the insert effects page here. I'm going to copy the insert effects from that other sound. So let's go here, and we'll killer bass. Yeah, killer bass sweep. I want the effects, so I'm going to say all used. No, you know what? I'm just going to say all. I want all of them. There. And we'll set our routing. Okay. For now, good enough. And what I mean by good enough is that once we put this into a combi, we can use more effects to kind of massage the details of that sound, right? So let's go back to the foundational bass sound. I don't need this sweepy layer anymore. But if you're a glutton for punishment like me, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make use of that layer anyway. And I'm going to keep the filter sweep in and just make the layer itself just a little bit quieter here. Because all it's doing is it's helping to thicken up the sound. And again, artistic interpretation, this may not work a little bit later. So when I put this in combi mode, we're going to find out if it works. And we'll see how it affects the sound. If it works, awesome. And if it doesn't, we can always just take it out later. But I wanted to get that idea. I wanted to see, you know, it doesn't hurt anything to try and see if it'll work, right? So let's do that. Okay. So I've got my sound. Okay. So I'm going to jump into combi mode just for a moment. Let's go to a brand new combi, and we're going to start pulling these layers in. So here's how I do it. If you've got a bunch of programs or a program that you want to pull into combi mode, really easy thing that you can do is just go to the drop-down menu. We're going to say copy from program. And when you copy from the program, you get to choose what it is that we're bringing in and which timbre we're assigning it to. So all of these tracks are referred to as timbres. You can think of them as like a mixer. You know how you've got different instruments on different channels on a mixer? It's exactly that, right? It's that idea. So I'm going to basically bring in all of my insert effects that I used on this killer bass sweep. I'm not bringing in all of them. I'm not bringing in my master and total effects because I didn't assign any. And I'm not bringing in karma or my drum track because I don't have any of that. So I'm going to bring that under timbre 1. We're going to do the same thing. Say copy from program. We'll choose the Resi sweep, and this time we're assigning it to timbre 2. Okay, so it's there. I'll have to tweak the EQ to kind of get it to really pop. And I don't normally do this part this early. I would normally just focus on getting all of the sounds, but I'm just going to tweak it enough that I can revisit it later. I really want that sweep to come out because that's such an important sound. Okay. Sounds decent. We'll adjust the levels and all that stuff later. Now, here's the other problem, is that from the playing perspective, it goes down to the E flat, but I'm on a 73 key and I'm missing an E flat, so I'm just going to bump this whole thing up an octave. So, let's bump them both up an octave. Yeah, I should have said down an octave. I had a brain misfire there. Now let's listen to the original and see how close we are at this point. Okay. Okay, I'm probably going to need to make this monophonic. So to get that kind of nice glide from the B flat down to the E flat. So I'm going to save this first off because we talked about that earlier. So I'm going to call this Killers. Somebody told me, I guess this is kind of the opening. There. Yeah, so this is it's Somebody Told Me by the Killers. I guess I could say TK for the Killers. Yeah, let's do that. TK. I want to be consistent. Somebody told me open. I tend to put it into setlist mode anyway and leave my notes there. So this is just kind of me being anal about stuff. Okay. Okay, yeah, I definitely want that monophonic to make that, to do the right thing. So I'm going to go back into program mode. And I'm just going to go to common, and I'm going to say mono and legato. Okay, so that's good, except it's going too fast. So when I go to my oscillator pitch common, I can see my portamento is taking, it's too snappy. Well, this actually isn't bad now that I enabled portamento. Okay, good enough. That works. So I just need to remember portamento is 48 because I need to do that on the other sound as well. Because I can't just edit one, I have to edit both. So we'll go back to making this mono, legato, and our pitch is 48. And you know what? Now that I'm thinking of it, I forgot to do it on the other layer as well in the first program. I realize I'm going really quick with this part. You can always watch this in slow-mo. All right. So EXI2, pitch enabled, 48, and we'll write that. Question is why 48? And it's because, to me, that sounds pretty close. I'm always going to go back and revisit it later on once I feel like it's close, and I've gone on to other things. One of the things that I found that happens, especially with sound programming, and this happens, I know, with people who are practicing music or painters or that kind of thing, it can happen that you basically get blinders on. So after so long, you get kind of a mental fatigue and you can't hear what's going on anymore. You can't hear what's different or that kind of thing. It's always important to take breaks. And so even at this point, like this is a perfect example of a point where I would probably save it, I would go to a different sound and then come back to it and go, okay, I was really off there. Why did I think that sounded right? And like revisit it and really try and make sure that, you know, things were there. Okay, so let's take a listen now that we've got it saved. We'll go into combi mode. I'll just get out, go back here. Okay, cool. We're getting there. It's better. It's not where it needs to be, but it's definitely better. So, in the interest of doing exactly, you know, practicing what I preach, I am going to go on to a totally different sound, and we're going to revisit this one a little bit later. I anticipate this stream going for probably another half an hour or so. I don't want to spend all night, but I do really enjoy hanging out with you guys. So I'm gonna go for another half hour, I think, and see how much I can get done. So let's go to another sound. So listening to this, there's also that that kind of thing happening. So we're gonna start working on that sound. Okay, when I'm listening to that, I don't hear any, you know, that portamento sweep or anything like that. It does kind of sound similar, not to this resi part, but to the actual. It sounds kind of similar. So instead of starting from complete scratch, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a copy of this program, get rid of that filter sweepy stuff, and see if I can get it kind of close. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to save this as something else. So this one could be, what would I call it? Let's see, Killer. I might call it Killer Slide Synth. These names are entirely arbitrary. I just want to give it some sort of description that kind of tells me what it is that we're doing. Okay, so this one, I'm actually going to turn that one off. I don't need that one. We're going to take it off of, let's see, this one here. Yeah, we're going to take portamento off because I don't think there's any of that happening. Like, that sounds more accurate to me without the... Oh, it's totally there. It's just fast. It's definitely there. Listen, if you listen to it again, just tell me if you hear it as well. You can hear that there's a definite kind of connection between the two. So I'm going to put that in. I'm going to make sure that that's actually there. It's just very fast. That's what it is. Let me see. Okay, so it needs to be faster. So probably more like 35 maybe? Nope, not fast enough. So maybe 30. That's better. So you hear 2 octaves. So John, let's explore this because I don't hear it. I do hear that it's going like, I do hear it doing an octave thing, like going. I don't hear it, but you know what? Let's experiment and let's hear what it would sound like if we had 2 octaves and see if it's closer or further away. So this is a neat test that we can do. So let's take one of these and go up an octave. Actually, I have FM on. That won't help here. to me, it doesn't sound like there's 2 octaves. I definitely hear the octave shift. Like, I can tell that they're going up the keyboard. What I do hear, however, is I hear the detuning between the layers is quite high. And this is something that you hear a lot in very popular music these days, is these big synths that are really detuned. A good example, actually, and I'll just give you this example, is... let me see here if I've got one. I thought I had one nearby. Is this one? Okay, this is Lady Gaga, actually. So the tuning for the oscillators are very separated from one another, and what that does is it gives it this really almost chaotic kind of sound where it's like fuzzy or something. Right, it's really, really wide, and I'm hearing that in this slide synth. Now, mine doesn't have that. Actually, let me fast forward here. So it's not as fuzzy. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take these saws and I'm going to turn them into detuned saws for both of them, because it sounds quite wide. We'll bring the detuning down a little bit, and that's starting to sound better. Oh yeah, that sounds great. Okay, so we'll do the same thing here. Okay, so yeah, I think that's pretty close. Now here's let's call it a pop quiz, and I'm going to give you guys a few seconds to answer this one. Think about it and let me know. There's something happening when you don't ignore the bass sound like that. That bass sound, ignore that for the moment. I'm going to play this back. Take a listen to this part that's going. There's 2 things that I know need to be changed. One of them has to do with Adsr. I'll let you kind of, mess with that one a little bit. But there's also something else in terms of effect. There's an effect in there that's it's massaging the sound in kind of a slow way. So I'm going to let it play. I might play it once or twice. I'm going to take a drink, and then I'm going to let you guys think about what it sounds like it might be doing, and let me know, and we'll experiment. Let's take a listen. Just ignore that part at the very end where it goes wow, wow, wow. Okay, so I'll play it one more time. Okay, so there is some panning things, I think, going on. I'm going to listen again. Okay, so when I'm listening to it, yeah, Wagner, that's exactly it. So Vincencio, when I listen to the panning, it actually sounds like it's pretty darn close to the center. I totally agree. There's a flanger, and you can hear the sound kind of thinning and getting big, and thinning and getting big. If you listen, now that we've kind of identified it, just take a listen to it again. Yeah, I don't know, Sonic, I don't know that it's necessarily gated. There's definitely something happening with the attack, and I have to listen to it again really closely to tell if it's a pitch thing. So, for example, the classic jump sound, actually, let me just save this real quick. The classic jump sound from Van Halen, right? I don't have it loaded, but one of the things that happens is that so the jump sound, one of the things that specific sound actually does is that there's a bit of a pitch change at the very, very beginning when you first play it. So instead of substituting the attack for like a fade-in attack, what it's actually doing is the pitch is quickly going like... like it's really, really, really fast, but it's doing this kind of quick pitch down as it's being attacked. So it could be that it's, you know, a pitch envelope, but it also could be that it's a... it's got portamento that's on every time you press the key. Sorry, Sonic, you're saying that you meant sidechained, eh? Okay. There's my Canadian coming out. I just said A. It's official. It's on video. I can't take it back. I'm sorry. That's Canadian too. I'm not sorry. Okay. Anyway, I digress. So let's see if we can get this... if we can kind of recreate that effect. Let's change it from... Actually, I'm going to keep the stereo chorus because I like how this sounds with these effects that we've got going on. I want to see if adding this chorus will actually... Or not the chorus, sorry, the flanger. Where did it go? There. Yeah, exactly, Wagner. You can actually hear it kind of higher up that it's actually closing and opening here. Yeah, so let's listen again towards the end here, I think. All right, so I think we're getting a lot closer. So let's take this flanger, and you're absolutely right. It's too fast. So let's take this frequency and bring it down a bit. And you're also right that it is a little bit more subtle too. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring this... So, okay, so one of the ways that the flanger works is it basically takes your signal and it kind of plays them offset from one another to get that kind of cool phasing effect. When your wet and dry is at dead center, you're basically... It's the difference between going like one way with one reel and one way with it. Like, I'm thinking of the way they actually used to do it was like with reels. They would have reels and they'd offset, like somebody would actually kind of press on it so it would change the pitch, or not the pitch, but the playback rate and stuff like that. Anyway, what this output is doing is basically saying, are we adjusting reel 1 or reel 2? I know that's not what's actually happening, but when you set it to 0, it's totally dry, and if you go minus, it starts to get thicker. So if we listen, like this is really full on depth, right? Like, or really wet, rather. But that's too much. It's overemphasized. So what we're going to do is we're going to back it off again to probably about 15, I think. Minus 15. Okay. I think we're probably close here. It could be a little bit thicker. Yeah, actually, I think that's probably better. And the other thing that I'm going to do is we need that pitch thing that's happening that I was talking about before with portamento. But this time I'm taking fingered off. So the way portamento works, portamento is that slidiness between notes, where it's like sliding up and down. Well, the way fingered works is that you can go to any note, right? And it'll snap to those notes that you play until you're holding a note already. If you're already holding a note, the fingered and portamento, it only does that pitch change when you're already connecting notes. Like if you've got one held down and you press another one. I'm going to turn that off. If you listen really close, you can hear when they're playing like almost staccato. They're going dit 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 dit. But when they play, you can hear that it's actually doing the pitch change. Right? I think we're really close. The only thing that I would really adjust at this point... Actually, here's another quick quiz. We're really, really close. Like, this is... It's really close. But there's one thing EQ-wise I might adjust. And so what do you folks think? What should I do here to make this just a little bit closer? It's really close so far, but there's a minor adjustment I might do. What do you guys think that might be? Oops. Now I'm breaking the place here. All right. So the thing that I'm thinking about is it's needs a little bit of that high end, that fuzziness. And again, it could be just my perception. It could be something that's done in like post. But it sounds a little brighter. It's not a lot, but I am going to adjust the EQ just a little tiny bit to bump up the highs and the high mids. I think that just about does it. Okay, so let's write that, let's save it, we're good. Okay, so that being said, then the last question is as well, Dave, what about this last part right here? Okay. What are you gonna do about that, Dave? Dave, what you doing? So here's what I would do in this situation. Instead of spending hours and hours and hours trying to really, really nail that sound, I'm probably just going to take that and sample it and assign it to a key. That way when it's like... And then you just trigger the... Oh, yeah, Sonic. Yeah, I definitely did that. Okay, John, sorry, save money for the next part. How soon am I going to be done? John, that's a very good question. So the unfortunate reality is that Audora isn't my full-time job. I really wish it were, because then things would be popping out all of the time. As it sits right now, it's not my full-time job. So I have a full-time job that I'm working. I've got life and things like that that happen. So I'm going as fast as I can. I don't know exactly when. So there's my goal. My absolute goal is to try and have this by September. I want to have it even sooner if possible. But just to give you an idea, we've been working on 2 sounds for 1 song. And yes, I mean, I've been answering questions and but it's a very, very arduous process. It takes a long time to get these sounds really, really, really dialed in. And it's funny because I can get like 90% of the way there really fast. And then every percent more that you go, it takes longer and longer and longer to get, if that makes sense. So it's almost that oh god, that exponential curve. It's like when you're practicing sports, for example, when you want to get that, you might be the top 2%. Well, if you want to become the top 1%, the amount of effort it takes is exponentially more than the percent before. It's that kind of thing. So it's gonna take a little while. So when I say August, September, I'm really hoping it'll be sooner than that. I really would like to do that, but I also really would like to enjoy summer too. So we'll see. I'm working on it. So tell you what we'll do. I'm gonna stop here, but we've got 15 minutes or so left. Let's take this time, and if you guys have questions about anything that we've worked on, or just questions in general that you were kind of curious about how to do stuff, you know what? Let's jump into that. And Psionic, you're saying sometimes the 80-20 principle is relevant. Familiarize me with the 80-20 principle. Is that like I'm not sure that I know that off the top of my head. I don't want to just make something up and be like, that's wrong. But I suppose I could probably just Google it, right? But yeah, this is a great opportunity, guys. If you had questions that you wanted to ask, how to do something, by all means, let me know. And yeah. Oh, by the way, there is more to this song, by the way. That was just the intro. There's still parts that happen later in the song. So just for example, while you guys are maybe writing out your questions, later in the song, it does more synth stuff. So I'll let some of it play so you can hear it. Okay, that's actually a really good point, because that's such a important thing here. Okay, so Wagner, hey, I'm going to head out. Yeah, okay, cool. Well, Wagner, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate you being here, man, and for your great questions and your help and everything. And Psionic, yeah, so getting things good enough, 80%, and not worrying about the... Okay, so there is... You know what? I totally understand what you're saying. So in terms of speed... like, okay, if I've got a show that's coming up in July with a band that I haven't played with before, but they play a lot of, like, the bands that I've been in have always been, like, classic rock stuff. This other band that I'm going to be filling in for, one of their keyboardists, they do a lot of really contemporary stuff, so a lot, like, Lady Gaga and things like that. And that kind of situation, I'll absolutely use your 80-20 principle, and that actually totally makes sense. Sometimes, well, actually a lot of the time, good enough is good enough. Sometimes good enough is good enough. Now, in my situation, with respect to Audora Audio and with respect to, making sounds for sale and that kind of thing, my goal is really to try and make it as close as I possibly can. Because there's so long story. I'll tell you a quick story. I grew up programming keyboards with listening to things like Dream Theater and Jordan Rudess, and Jordan Rudess was a programmer for Korg and Kurzweil and you name it. Like the guy. Yes, Jordan Rudess can play, no question. The guy's phenomenal. But he is also a very skilled programmer on top of that. And so I grew up listening to things like Over the Edge and like a lot of this stuff. And, you know, I spent a lot of time trying to figure out his sounds. Even now, I still do. I'm still like, how the heck did he do that, you know? So it's always the struggle to try and do that. So, yeah, when it comes to sound accuracy, I love sitting down at the keyboard and feeling like the person I'm playing. You know, like if I'm playing, you know, a song, I really want to feel like, you know, I belong to that band, you know? And so there's kind of a magic that comes with that, and that's where the focus of you know, Audora Audio is exactly that. Is I want those sounds as close as I can possibly get them, without, you know, breaking my life in half to try and make that happen, right? So, but yeah, it's for a custom product, you do want that precision. Yeah, Psionic, you're absolutely right. So, yeah, no, that's awesome. So your question, can you explain saving samples again, especially without overwriting old samples? Okay, sure. So, saving samples without overwriting old samples. So, okay. I've got a video out that describes the basics of, you know, the sample mode, how to do samples, how to save them and that kind of thing. I think your answer might be in there as well. Was there something specific? Like, so when you say saving samples again, especially without overwriting old samples, do you mean like adding samples to an existing library that you have? Or do you mean something else? I'm not sure that I follow exactly. Not that your question wasn't good. I just I don't understand. I'm having a moment there. Oh yeah. So while you're writing out your question, the thing that I was pointing out real quick here was this. That's like a class. That's like an important thing in the song. And this is one of those great tests that you could do. It's like, okay, I think I've got my sound right. Okay, so it's pretty close. I would go back and dial that sound in even a little bit more. It's just some EQing, I think, but that's a pretty good test to tell. Okay, this is, you know, isolated. This is specific, and it's a key part of the song. So, okay, so Psionic, yeah. So your question about saving samples. Okay, there are. There are two sampling types in the Kronos. Actually, let me get my my teaching board. One sec. I didn't bother to erase this yet. Oh yeah, here we go. Okay. So let me see if I can make this visible. Oh, yeah. There. All right. Kind of, yeah. No, that's not really good here, is it? Okay. I'm going to go crazy. I'm going to lay this on my Kronos. People are going to hate me for it. There we go. Let's see if I can make this work. Not really, but okay, hopefully you'll get the idea. So, there are two types of samples, or two sample types in the Kronos. There is your KSC, and then there's a user bank KSC. So the premise behind this is that your samples that are in a KSC file, like when you save your samples, right? So if you've got a sample library or something like that, and you save your samples, it's going to be stored in like a file .ksc. And this was the original file format that that was used by Korg to store your samples back in like the Trinity, or well, I think Trinity had samples, Triton, and so on and so forth. Anyway, so you've got your samples stored here. The user bank samples basically are references. So they reference samples. They use the samples, but they stream from the hard drive. So they're not actually stored in sample mode. They're not stored in the RAM. Ultimately, is what it comes down to. So if you're like super techie and you're familiar with a lot of that stuff, these samples are not stored in RAM. They're stored on the solid state, and they just stream from the hard drive. But what that means is that you can't edit them, right? So what you want to do is, if you have a library, like a sample library, actually, I can give you a better example instead of using this. I'll give you a better example on the Kronos itself. And here we go. I'm messing things up all over the place here. Let's see if I can get this back. Kind of how it was. Ish. All right. It's not perfect, but it'll do. Okay. So, in the Kronos, I have a sample library. So, under my KSC autoload, yeah, I've got Uptown Funk and I've got my contemporary samples. So I'm gonna unload these actually. So let's remove these. Yep. And remove these. Yep. Don't need them. Okay. So my sample library, I build my sample library like this. So I've got a sample library, and in the sample library, all it has are my contemporary samples, and that wasn't the right location, was it? No, it wasn't that one. It was this one. Yeah, there it is. So I've got two contemporary sample sets. I've got my contemporary samples. Here, let's get this right here. There we go. Close. Shoot. There we go. Okay, so I've got my contemporary samples and I've got my user bank samples. When I want to perform, I use my user bank samples, and this is the one that I load when I boot up. And basically what happens is this is going to show up as a waveform, so to speak, or almost like a sample library, like your expansion libraries. It'll show up kind of like that. But when I want to edit my sample, so let's say I wanted to edit a sample and add it to my existing library, what I need to do is I need to load this file. So I need to load the one that's not the user bank. So I'm going to load this. And it'll give me some sort of warning. See right here, I said clear sampling mode data. And basically what it's saying is that, well, this contemporary samples KSC is already loaded as a user bank sample. So to reload it, you have to clear all your samples. Okay, fine. So we'll reload. And what this is going to do is this is going to take all of my contemporary samples. I'm going to go into sampling mode. Now they're here, right? So I've got my 24 karat magic samples. Right? So I've got my 24 karat magic samples. I've got my Britney Spears toxic samples. Right? So I've got these samples. And well, what you do is when you have a new sample that you want to add, you go to the next free slot. As opposed to, I mean, there's a couple of ways that you can do it. I would go to the next free slot and say create a new stereo sample and then bring all of your stuff into it, right? So I don't know. I'm just gonna grab something random, just a random sample, whatever here. Sure. Okay. So I've got the sample assigned. Okay, yeah, sure. So I've got my sample assigned. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my disk mode and I'm going to overwrite this sample library. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go save. I'm going to save sampling data. I'm not going to choose these links to EXS. I don't need any of these links to my expansion libraries because the samples that I'm using don't reference them. So I'm just going to say sampling mode data only. I'm going to save all of my samples, multi-samples, all of that stuff. So I've got my contemporary samples, and I'll hit OK. And it's going to say, you're going to overwrite this. Is that what you want to do? And I'm like, yep, okay. I hit cancel here on purpose, but yeah, you just say yes. So you got it now. So all the samples on your disk, you just add them to your custom library. Yeah, that's exactly it. So yeah, I basically add them to my sample library. And then what I do is I load my user bank under my auto load. That way it's available. Now here's what I'll do, just for being thorough, because I know you understand it now, so you clearly got it. But just to be thorough, let me show you where the samples show up when you load it as a user bank as opposed to a sample library, okay? So when I go into program mode, I have to go to one of the HD1 engines, okay? In the HD1 engine, under multi, you have ROM mono, but when you hit this drop down, you have ROM mono, ROM stereo. You're going to have any expansions and stuff. Because I cleared my sample memory, nothing's there. But I do have my sample mode samples, and I could reference samples this way. So I've got my... Right, you've got your samples. Okay. Now, the thing is that they'll show up under your sample memory, but if you load the user bank KSC, these aren't going to be here, so your program is going to be pointing to the wrong spot. So what you do is you build your sample library and you get them available. But when you go into global mode, instead of loading your contemporary samples.ksc, I'm actually going to remove that one. Yeah. I'm going to add a KSC, and in this case, I'm going to add my user bank samples. So I'm going to say open. Oops. No, this is the one I want to add. There we go. So my contemporary samples, so instead of showing up in sampling mode, now they're going to show up as an expansion. Okay, so I'm going to do an auto load now. This is going to clear out my sample RAM. So it's going to get rid of what's in RAM, and it's just going to basically leave a shortcut to the sample. As opposed to loading the entire sample, it's kind of like, you know, a shortcut on your desktop versus having the entire program itself on the desktop. It's the same idea, right? So now I have to talk for like 4 minutes while this loads all the samples. I didn't even think of that, but you know, that happens. So yeah, that is the Korg Kronos. It does take a long time to boot. Try not to boot it in the middle of the show. It does happen. That's my story. Okay, we're pretty close. We're at 96%. Whoops, and I keep running into this boom stand. I'm going to find a new way. Actually, I probably just want to get a better camera in general. One of those 4K cameras would be nice. I don't know what I'd use it for, recording one video a year, you know? So, we've got our samples. Come on. There we go. So now you'll notice when I go back to this initial program that was originally pointing at the sample mode, now it shows up as an expansion. So you see how you have all these different expansions, like you've got your ROM expansions, brass, vintage, blah, blah, blah. Now down at the very bottom, instead of saying SMP for sample mode, it's actually showing that it's streaming from the hard drive, and it even shows you the directory that it exists in. So you can see it's loading the samples from the hard drive, from the Millennium folder under contemporary samples, right? And so now when I select this, I can play, right? So I've got all of my samples available. And this is where you go instead to find your samples when they are loaded under the user bank KSC. Now, when you go into sampling mode, there's no key maps. There's no samples there. There's nothing to do here because they're not in RAM. When you hit the sampling mode button on your Kronos, think of that as accessing your RAM directly, right? That's what that's for. So hopefully that fills in some blanks there for you. But yeah, streaming from the hard drive is unique, and it is super powerful because it means that you don't have you can have 3 or 4 gigabytes worth of, or more of samples. And in RAM, you're actually only using maybe a megabyte or 2 for all of the links to all of the key maps and everything. It's super powerful, yeah. Awesome. Okay. We are just about done. Gonna call it a night, I think. I'm gonna wait for 2 more minutes. If there's any other questions, this is the right time to ask. Otherwise, we're going to finish it up. So I'll give you a couple of minutes. Think about any questions that you have, and then we're going to jump off. Yeah, Sonic, exactly. Your sampling mode is basically in RAM, and that's also why when you turn it off and back on, there's nothing there. Actually, also, when you load stuff from the user bank, as opposed to loading it in your sample memory, it actually takes less time to load as well, because it only needs to load the links or the references as opposed to the entire sample in memory, right? So yeah, it makes a big difference. Yeah, you guys get to watch me drink my undisclosed beverage. Here we go. So, all right, we'll wait for a couple minutes, and then I think we might just call it a night. Yeah, sorry about moving all this stuff around here. I was trying to illustrate stuff. I really, ultimately, if I were a better streamer here, I'd have like 17 cameras and 17 angles, and I could go between them, and I could have like special effects and like fireworks and stuff. That would be cool. Fireworks, you know, or light bulbs, right? Yeah. All right, well, tell you what. Let's probably too long a subject. No, Psionic, throw it in. I'm just curious. Vincent, thank you for showing up. Thanks for your support. I appreciate it. Yeah, Psionic, if I can give you... Okay, so the question would be on sequencer and loading into setlist for live use. Anything that has a predetermined like click track and stuff like that, that kind of thing, honestly, unless your drummer's got a click track and they're used to using it, not he, but he or she, they are used to using it, then that's not necessarily a bad thing. But I try and avoid, like complicated playback stuff through sequence mode anyway. Not that it's not powerful, because it really is. It's just not something I personally use, but that's definitely something that we can talk about. I do not have a Patreon account. I do have PayPal, and I can, do donations and stuff through there. Actually, there's, if you look at the description for the video, there's just a quick thing there. I mean, that's cool, but I should actually look into Patreon. I've heard of other people using it too. Nezzy, so I am going to be having more of these sessions. This was more of an experiment to see. I mean, I know I can be verbose, I can talk a lot, and I can explain a lot, and that kind of thing, and that's awesome, and I love talking about this stuff. There's not a lot of people kind of in my local life that I can really explain this kind of stuff to, so it's really unique to be able to discuss it with all of you folks, right? So I'm definitely going to be having more of these sessions, and I'll be trying to communicate through the same channels like Facebook and stuff like that. When I'm having these, probably 2 to 3 days in advance. In the next times, I'm going to be trying to do it either earlier in the day or later at night too, for the different time zones as well. So definitely something I'm planning on doing. So yeah, great questions. All right, folks, I think I'm going to call it a night here. Everybody have an awesome weekend. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for the awesome questions. And I really look forward to hanging out with you guys again. So you'll have a great weekend and have a good one.